morning glory. Say there, stop that yawning. A brand new day is dawning. Pull up the shade and let the sun come through. Good morning glory. Spend about an hour underneath the shower and keep on singing like the birdies do.
Books of the Week is back on the air. If you can believe it, we had a little lull last week, and I must apologize for that. I was deeply under the weather, and I had wonderful hallucinations and delusions, and one of them involved a total role reversal. I was the brilliant talent, and Steve Donahue was the lowly producer. I threw hairbrushes at his head. It was so much fun. Well, back to reality. Steve Donahue, book critic at large for CPL Radio. Good morning.
Good morning. It was a rough week without CPL Radio's Books of the Week, but we're back. The bad boys of the book world are back.
I left my leather jacket at home, Daddy-O. But anyway, and as always, we are made possible by the Friends, and I always like to grab an item on the way into the studio from the Friends book sale. I grabbed a perfect sample today, one that Steve will say, "That's my life." This is called Following Atticus. This is a schnauzer, which Steve worked with. And this is a gentleman named Tom Ryan, a journalist whose life was kind of in shambles. And until he brought a schnauzer into his life. So perhaps Steve could profess the same.
The mirror image of that, sure. Everything was going fine. Then I imported a third world general into my life.
I didn't know they let ladies hold such high rank, but that's all right. Frida is who we're talking about. Also, what do we do on this show? Well, I'll tell you what. We go through 3 genres. You can't really call them a genre. I guess it's just a segment of literature and books. We start with nonfiction. We move our way into fiction, and then Steve throws a wild card our way, and we all scratch our heads and go, huh? Steve, where are you starting us off today, nonfiction-wise?
Well, our lineup today has 2 Pulitzer Prize winners in it.
Uh-oh.
And so it might be worthwhile, I know, it might be worthwhile to remind readers or viewers ahead of time that the Pulitzer Prize is largely biddable, as so many book prizes are. Some years it can be determined entirely by what the prize judges saw Rachel Maddow talk about that morning. Other years, not so much.
Are you saying that I could be one of the selectors?
No. Oh. I'm not saying that. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. The minute he showed any sign of human weakness by being sick last week, I tried to have him fired. But it didn't work.
So strange seeing all these weird strangers hovering around the studio I've never met before. They all said, "Hey, we're from Baston." So...
No, our first book is The Achilles Trap by Steve Cole, a popular historian, public journalist Steve Cole, who does excellent work. A lot of people might remember him for his book Ghost Wars, which I'm sure is in your library system.
Absolutely, yep.
This new one is about Saddam Hussein and his long relationship with the United States and the blowing apart of that relationship that led to the 2003 invasion of his country 20 years ago. And his downfall, and of course, his infamous end, being found in a bolt hole and put on trial and hanged, yelling his defiance to the world, literally to the last second. He yelled his defiance to, there's a video, the smuggled out video that you can still watch on YouTube, that is him just with a noose around his neck, yelling his defiance until the final drop, just as I expect our viewers will make us do.
I will not. I'm from Wisconsin. We don't yell defiance.
No, in Wisconsin, the Wisconsin version of a ruthless death sentence is withholding seconds.
That's true.
That'll probably happen to you.
No Racine Kringle for you.
Cole does excellent work, and I shouldn't have butted my throat clearing up against his book in a way to make it seem like it was applying to him. He does excellent work. For all I know, The Achilles Trap is worthy of a Pulitzer Prize. He didn't win it for the Achilles Trap is new, so he didn't win it for that. But it's a very, very good book. He has certainly done a huge amount of work. There's a you're very prominent, you won a Pulitzer Prize, but in both our lead installments today. It's a butt of a very different kind. Cole writes very smooth, inviting prose. This is if you're looking at this and thinking, this is egghead nonfiction of a type that will not pull me in. No, that will pull you in. Especially since for a lot of your patrons, I would imagine this is lived history.
Yes.
This is something they will remember.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's the problem. So if you were paying attention during the Iraq War, you're going to be scratching your head at a lot of points in Cole's book. Cole's book is about good old-fashioned ancient Greek hubris. That this petty tyrant, this what one journalist at the time referred to as an overglorified hilltop bandit.
Yeah.
Sure. And that journalist was me. That this guy became a useful figure, a factor for the U.S. government, the U.S. government in front of the pulpit in the press room will say one thing about its interventionist policies everywhere else in the world.
Sure.
But if you were to talk to CIA operatives or their handlers, they would say a very different thing. They would say that they have their hand everywhere. That anytime there's ever any kind of power movement anywhere, they're involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then they would kill you.
Yes.
you would hear that, and then you would die.
And then you get to stand on a platform and scream with a rope around your neck.
I don't want to damn this book. It is very good. It is very intelligent. But there are large portions of the portrait it paints of Saddam Hussein that he would have loved. And you have to think, when you're reading that, you have to think, well, that can't be good.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are large portions of this narrative in which Saddam Hussein is just busy going about his own local dictating policies, being a dictator, gold palaces while his people starve, the secret police on every corner, 2 psychotic sons running the Trump Industries while he's running the country while he's busy, cavorting with young slaves or whatnot.
Sure.
When suddenly the United States shows up, 2 guys in reflective sunglasses with a suitcase full of money and say, we kind of like the cut of your gibberish. And they play him along for his sway in the region and his oil and whatnot until he steps out of line.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they did him wrong. It's almost expected an et to America.
Does this book actually have the gall, dare I say, to paint Hussein as a tragic figure?
No.
Oh, good.
No. But you only have to take the one more step. It takes you right up to that. You only have to take the one more step, as opposed to this book painting the picture of Saddam Hussein being irrelevant, which wouldn't work for a drama. But the portrait that you could paint is Saddam Hussein as irrelevant, that it didn't matter who he was or what he was doing, including brutal murders.
There's that.
It didn't matter to the CIA and the NSA because he was useful to them until he wasn't. Right. And then all of a sudden he was, well, a lot of our viewers will remember weapons of mass destruction. All of a sudden, a narrative was taken out of a closet where it had been fully formed and just hanging there, ready for use, and applied against him.
Yeah. It could have gone smoother. It didn't have to go like this, perhaps.
What viewers often say about our episodes.
Those are our good reviews.
I don't want to go all tinfoil hat here, but it is clear that alternate narrative, a bad guy we've always been meaning to get around to, who finally stepped over the line, and we've got to do this for the boys, for the troops, for the right, for the wrong. It is clear that narrative was hanging in a closet for 20 years. Why isn't that clear in Cole's book? Why the alternate story from the one that the Achilles Trap, in the Achilles Trap, Achilles, a hero of Homer's Iliad, is Saddam Hussein. In the Achilles Trap, you get a narrative of a local despot who stepped over the line, betrayed by his American allies, all sorts of murky dealings behind doors, but never that this is just standard operating procedure. Never a hint of what the CIA did in South America. anywhere in South America.
Yeah.
Never a hint that Saddam Hussein, that nothing in the Saddam Hussein story is surprising.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at that alternate narrative, which plenty of people were screaming from the rooftops in 2003, in 2003.
Yep.
Plenty of people were screaming this story from the rooftops saying, look, this is about oil. Plenty of people were screaming that then. This is not a revelation.
Yeah.
I guess my complaint about the Achilles Trap is that it would have been nice if that alternate narrative had received more attention, was more weight. I don't really want to read a book about Saddam Hussein being a victim in any way other than a willing victim. The thing about these heavily mustachioed strongmen who fit into this CIA playbook is that they all know what they're getting into.
Right.
They know perfectly well. I mean, they might be dumb, but they can read a newspaper. They know perfectly well what will happen if the CIA starts not to like them.
Right.
They know perfectly well, somewhere in their dim, barbarous mind, they know perfectly well that alternate narrative is hanging in a closet and just waiting.
It was written years ago. Someone writes, it's almost like, again, a ChatGPT thing. We're like, hey, ChatGPT, how would we eliminate, if we were going to, how would we eliminate Saddam Hussein? And then you just get the printout. And
I have just such a narrative hanging in a closet about someone else. My producer looks up and there are two guys in beard and sunglasses just outside the control booth. Look like patrons.
What's wild is he's got more than one. It's like 18. Choose your own adventure or demise.
The number of fans goes up depending on how bad the malefactor is. I mean, I can certainly recommend the Achilles Trap. I certainly recommend it to anybody who lived through that history.
Sure.
When you if you lived through that history, or even if you didn't, and you just have Wikipedia, I want you to remember one name while you're reading the book, and the name is not Saddam Hussein. The name is a book. The name is something that will not give you a strong impression when you finish the book. It'll be in one name among many. I want you to remember one name throughout this book: Dick Cheney. I want you to remember the name Dick Cheney. And if you don't know him, Google him. He is still alive. He's on his 15th heart.
And none of them work.
None of them work, and the last 10 were not donated voluntarily.
Wait a minute. Yeah, I still got it. My gosh. One last question on this topic. How much does that amazing, incredible superhero named George W. Bush show up in this particular narrative?
He's in there.
Ample? Okay.
He's in there. But he's in there, and his hands aren't entirely clean. But you have to ask yourself, the fact that this book paints a broader narrative that Saddam Hussein would have approved of has to give you pause.
Yeah.
Regardless of the Pulitzer credentials of the writer.
Sure. Well, to sign off on this topic, I'll call him the way W used to, just to insult him, Saddam.
Yeah.
That was always interesting.
Yeah.
We're 12. Anyway, well, let's leave one fiction behind, the nonfiction behind, and work our way to the fiction department. What's cooking over there, sir?
The fiction department, we are again dealing with a Pulitzer Prize winner.
Oh boy.
And this is Tommy Orange, whose debut novel, There,
yeah,
was probably a huge hit at your library. It was a huge hit at
book club fodder.
Absolutely darling of book clubs. Of course, there ought to be a law written on the books in Geneva that an effing debut novel cannot win the Pulitzer Prize. But there isn't such a law. So it did. What do we associate with debut novels? Flaws. We associate flaws with debut novels. That's the whole point. Nobody writes a perfect novel the first time at bat. That's the whole point, is that we associate flaws with debut novels. And I knew that going in, a debut novel, of course, and it was there was hysterically overpraised. Everybody loved it. And not only that, but in all quarters of social media, the praise was accompanied by the implied threat that if you don't praise it, you're a racist, which is pretty common for the 21st century. And I'm sure that it wasn't Tommy Orange's aim.
Great marketing plan.
It tends to work. That's the problem, is that it tends to work. that leverage, for some reason, even though it's tossed around as easily as Boston cream pies, it tends to terrify people.
Yes.
I don't know, even to the point where if you were afraid of that, you might appoint a president of Harvard. It'd be an alternate reality. I'm sure that wouldn't happen in our reality.
I think I just figured out the fast track to my next raise.
Yeah, but it won't work. You're the enemy. There's a checklist they use, and it's pretty much your face.
I was bar mitzvahed in 1983, Steve.
Yeah, but it didn't take Bubala.
I'm a bar mitzvah failure. Turn in my yarmulke.
Where was I before we got off into
Yes, I heard Tommy Orange wrote a book.
Right. Yes, he did. He wrote. Thank you for keeping me grounded here.
I do.
He wrote a debut novel, and some lethal things happened to there. It was hysterically overpraised everywhere, and it, like I mentioned, it was hauled into the culture wars.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not attributing any of this to the author. I don't know the author. I've never even watched an interview, so I don't. As far as I know, all of that was accidental, and he's just out here writing.
I found it to be half a good book when I did go through it for some book club that I had.
Yes,
yeah, and I thought it was good. Yeah,
and I found that the absolute most you can say about it is that it's about half of a good book, and that half is scattered all over the place.
All over the place.
Not with famous victims. It's not like the first half is good. The little bits and pieces of it that are good are scattered all over it.
Yeah.
In other words, if we can call a spade on Books of the Week, in other words, what we've just described is a bad book.
Oops.
If it's only half good and the half bits are scattered around like little prizes at the beach, then it's a bad book. There's nothing wrong with that. No. Debut novels are almost honest with being bad books. Yeah. But you absolutely could not call it bad. And that naturally sets the table for whatever he writes next. A part of me was actually perversely hoping that he would not write anything next, that he would never write another book, because how do you come back from this?
Yeah.
How do you come back from that kind of hosannas of praise are never good for an author. So I approached, we're talking now about his second book, Wandering Stars.
Wandering Star, yeah.
And when I approached this second book, I wondered, well, you've got two roads that you can take here. You can either buy into the hype, or you can just keep your head down and get better at what you do.
Mm-hmm. What? Which road do we take, Steve?
Wandering Stars is about half a good book.
Oh boy! You know, if you cram those two books together, you got a whole good book. But you need scissors and tape and.
It starts with the Sand Creek Massacre in 1864, which will be a footnote to a footnote for Americans in their history, in the history that they learned at school. You really should, if you're an American, you really should look it up and read about it. It is as horrifying, as stark, as indefensible as every other betrayal of First Nations people in this country's history.
Absolutely.
This one notable for the fact that even when the white people were engaged in a bloody civil war, they still had time to shiv treaty signers and innocent women and children in the back. This book starts off with that, and then it moves on to, there was of course one of the most evil sides of the U.S. government's treatment of what it once referred to as Red Indians was to civilize them. Right. In heavy air quotes, which always meant to Christianize them. So take the war bonnet off their head and put a nice black hat on, put them in Western clothes and send them to church. Right.
That always works.
It was widespread and it was awful. Capturing, kidnapping Native American children and Christianizing them. That went on, and one of the people that did that was a guy named Richard Henry Pratt, who is a major character in this novel. But he's not. And neither is Theodore Roosevelt, and neither is the Sand Creek Massacre, and neither is his Carlisle Indian School. None of these things are major characters in a novel, because this is only barely remembers that it's a novel. Only once in a while does it remember that. The action largely returns to the reservation, to the modern day reservation. Sure. All of its problems, all of its endemic health problems, the health indexes in American Indian reservations are off the charts. The institutional care is not particularly good, except in the places where casino money has made the tribes wealthy.
That is a Wisconsin phenomenon, really.
Yeah, Wisconsin phenomenon. I want to point out here. We won't make this into a social justice episode of Books of the Week, but I want to point out that money is good, but sovereignty is even better.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the tribes that are making bucket loads of money through casinos or whatever don't have the lands that were promised to them in perpetuity in treaties signed by the U.S. government and never invalidated by the U.S. government.
Yeah.
I'm happy if you are penned up in the desert and you find oil there. Of course, I'm happy for you. But wouldn't you rather own Madison?
Right.
But we won't get all causey. We don't want to do that.
No.
Instead, I want to point out. Well, we strike with neither fear nor favor here in Books of the Week, right? We are not
true. I am constantly fearful.
Yes, but of me. That's perfectly acceptable. I have an ivory-backed hairbrush ready right now.
The last welt went away.
We pulled no punches with Steve Call's book. Let's pull no punches here. Wandering Stars is terrible. It's sloppy. It's disorganized. It's only intermittently remembers that it's a novel. The novelistic parts are not all that good. The turns of phrases are extremely shop-worn. The history is extremely tilted. There are plenty of really good, hard-hitting Native American histories of their serial betrayals at the hand of the government.
Yeah.
Better to read those than read anything in this book. This is bad.
Do you fear or do you see already that it's going to get wildly overpraised again? Is that this poor man's fate?
It is going to get wildly overpraised. How could you not? How can you not? In our current culture war moment, how can you not praise a book that's about those subjects? You can't say, well, these subjects are deplorable, but so is this novel. You'll be drummed right out of your job.
This is a hostage situation, Steve.
Well, the thing that I worry about now, having read these two books, the thing that I worry about now is that Tommy Orange, I don't know him, never even seen an interview with him. The thing I worry about now is that he is a hothouse flower and that he has been told you are the second coming of Leslie Marmon Silko, and so you can do no wrong. Yeah. This book, Wandering Stars, reads very much like a novel written by an author who thinks he can do no wrong.
Boy. Oh,
that's
man.
Bad, of course. That's really bad.
In the arts, that's terrible.
Yeah. I think we can agree. In fact, I'm sure you will agree that there's only one person in the world who can do no wrong.
Yes, sir. I was thinking that this morning as I was driving in. I almost ran over a school bus because I was so focused on the fact that you could do no wrong.
So our two main books here, the fiction and the nonfiction, both Pulitzer Prize winners, both very qualified recommendations. I do not recommend Wandering Stars. You will, if you read it without thinking this author is someone important with a capital I, you will think, okay, but where's the novel? What on earth is going on here?
Where's the beef?
These are little scraps of things. Like you said, it's one half of a good book.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, the book club that we did with There, I distinctly recall many of the members of that particular book club feeling very guilty about saying, I don't think I like this.
No.
It was fun to watch them squirm.
Book clubs are nothing if not honest. No one's watching them until 2025. No one's watching book club. So, but that's our next segment. Book clubs are nothing but honest, and their reports are all the same.
Yeah.
Which is, what is this?
What?
This we read, a cozy murder mystery last month that had more plot cohesion than this thing does. Yeah. Why am I supposed to like this? That was the number one question from book responses all over the country. Am I supposed to like this?
Right.
That's a bad question. For anybody to ask about a novel, that's a bad question.
The only way I could answer the charges was saying it was well lauded.
I just realized that am I supposed to like this is also our viewers' response to this broadcast. I don't know what that does for us. Where's our viewers?
Perfectly natural response. Just write it out, everybody.
just lie back and think of England. That's the number one response. Am I supposed to like this?
My God made ibuprofen. You take it right before you push play.
Qualified reactions are the two main items here. Yeah. Qualified reactions. Yeah, so absolutely. Basically, in response to our nonfiction pick, you want to finish the book and just ask one question. Dick Cheney? And in response to our second book, you want to finish the book and ask one question. Pulitzer Prize?
Oh.
There you go. You'll be fine. As long as you're
Actually, I think for the second one, you should say Dick Cheney too. Just like I want to blame him for everything. Why not? Anyway, so look at me taking the reins and steering us over to the, shall we say, murkier side of books of the week.
wild card.
Let's get our trench coats on and head on over to the wild card, Steve.
Yeah, which is going to our wild card today is largely public documents, but they are pulled together into one volume and given an introduction and interpretive material. There's a lot of work that went into this volume. The Trump Indictments. Do you have this in your system?
Not as yet. I don't know if it either hasn't dropped, as the kids say, or maybe we just are nervous. I'm not sure which.
You won't have it in your system soon.
I'm sure.
I was wondering if you did have it in your system. This is a collection of the indictment documents for former President Donald Trump, the first U.S. president ever to be criminally indicted. Much less
would this be Jamie
biblically criminally indicted.
Yes. Would this be by Jamie Raskin's hands or who's the other like
there's a number of legal experts, some of them you will have seen on cable news that weighing in on the significance of this. I would argue that just reading the documents themselves is enough, certainly to remind you of the historic moment in which you live. You live in an incredibly historic moment. This has never happened before. And the indictments don't even tell the whole story. They just indicate it, especially the indictments for the espionage case in Florida, which is mistakenly being referred to as the stolen documents case. The documents were stolen, were willfully withheld, and they were fenced to the highest bidder on the international market to our enemies. That is espionage. That is not stolen documents. That is espionage. But it isn't called that because the mainstream press in America is fearful of a future in which they will have to answer to a Trump autocracy. They're hedging their bets against a Trump autocracy. And anyone out there listening who thinks that that kind of talk is Trump derangement syndrome has had to call it Trump derangement syndrome right through. 10 federal felony indictments, 20, 30, 70, 90, 91 federal felony indictments. You've had to call it Trump derangement syndrome throughout that whole thing. You've had to call it Trump derangement syndrome through a legal adjudication for rape, 2 legal adjudications about armed insurrection. Still Trump derangement syndrome. So nothing to see here, folks.
It's at number 92 where I'm going to change my mind, Donahue.
Number 92.
That's the one I'm waiting for.
And the latest in the Trump derangement syndrome derangement, a signal by the U.S. Supreme Court last week that Donald Trump's wishes are more important than the U.S. Constitution.
Oh, we knew
the U.S. Constitution say in black and white that you cannot run for office if you are guilty of insurrection. If you are found guilty illegally of insurrection, you cannot run for office. Now, keep in mind, the article in the 14th Amendment doesn't say there has to be a legal finding of law.
No.
It just says if you are, and he is, because we all watched it with our eyes, which are in our head and are responsible for vision. We all watched it happen, and so did the rest of the world. With all the rest of the world, the French saying "avec insurrection," the whole rest of the world watched it in real time. There isn't a question of fact here, and the amendment doesn't require it. But nevertheless, there have been legal findings of insurrection, and it's self-actuating. The Supreme Court is not involved. The 14th Amendment says if you're guilty of insurrection, you can't run for office. You can't hold office in the federal government.
I would think even years ago, I would think even years ago, if you sneezed the word insurrection, they'd be like, no, sorry, disqualified. Yeah. And now it's just like, well, I mean, there were tourists.
There was concocted in the mainstream press the idea that the Supreme Court had to weigh in on this. That is not true. Any more than they have to weigh in on whether or not you're old enough to run for president.
Or whether the show should exist.
How did they weigh in on it? They weighed in on it by saying Trump's more important than this.
Yeah.
If you think you Trump derangement derangers, if you think the Supreme Court is not going to do the same thing for presidential immunity, a ridiculous nonsense of presidential immunity, you're nuts. They have signaled with this ruling that Trump's feelings are more important than the Constitution. And all of that comes into, we're not too far afield. All of that comes into play with these indictments, with this book of indictments. Because here you see over and over again, the government bending over backwards to bend the law to protect this felon.
Yeah.
This predicate felon. over and over again. His case in the Florida espionage case, that will never come to trial because of one apparatchik judge. The other indictments were levied on him years after the event.
Yeah. I mean,
it's for maddening reading. I assume you'll put up a picture of the volume. If you find it, the legal commentary in here is very good. It makes for very involving but enraging reading. Just enraging that any of this had to get this far, much less the idea of how much farther it will go. Because
this is very depressing. Sounds like a very depressing afternoon.
Yes, well, every major release document that has come out from what we have to call the Trump era has been incredibly depressing. The Mueller report was incredibly depressing to read.
It was fun to read because of all the big blocks of ink. I was actually making sort of a game of that, but the redacted stuff.
Read it. If your viewers, if the library system never gets it, maybe the library is hedging its bets against a Trump autocracy. If the library system never gets it, you still should read it. Yeah. This is the first time that this has ever happened.
Yeah.
If you're an American citizen, you have to read. If you're an American citizen who's not insane, unfortunately, 130 million Americans are insane. So 130 million Americans, 130 million people, that's more than even watch this show.
just by two.
130 million people are looking at these indictments voted out by juries in 4 different jurisdictions and saying it's all a plot. It's all an orchestrated plot. How would you do that?
I mean, can
you explain to me how you could get juries to do that? They looked at evidence and they voted out indictments. If there hadn't been a name on this, the indictments would have happened anyway. Yeah. It's not a plot. And so it's incredibly historically important. It's the first and only time that a U.S. president has ever been federally indicted, much less 91 times.
I mean, we've been waiting for this moment because we figured someone would come down the pike and do this, but it just didn't seem possible that it would be so successful, like that he just steamrolled everything. It's remarkable.
It's remarkable. I have to admit, even after Watergate, there was a fugitive little lefty part of my withered, bitter, battered soul that was expecting a federal indictment in January of 2021. It was obvious in January of 2021 that Trump had orchestrated and led an armed insurrection to overthrow the government in which people died.
Yeah.
That was obvious in January. That was obvious years and years ago. Years and years ago. People who had not yet been born when that was obvious are now walking.
Right.
Verbally. How many illegitimate children have you had in that?
I mean, I'm trying to contribute to the voter count here.
The friends of the library just did a collective spit take.
Up there at the info desk, I look great. How can you resist?
The whole question that on viewers' minds of maybe this week they'll pivot to professionalism. I guess we can lay that to
rest. Every week is new hope.
Every week they hope. Maybe they'll pivot, and then every week they get fried donuts and illegitimate children.
So that's what it says on my business card.
So a bit of a downer.
It was a rough week. I come back from major illness and you throw all this in my face.
We'll do a more upbeat episode next time.
Please, Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. And, come on, help us out here.
This is a bit of a rough week.
I'm a little battered.
It's qualified recommendations right down the ticket. Steve Call is an excellent writer. This is an excellent book, but it tells the government story.
Yeah.
And the government in 2003 was deeply, deeply guilty. He probably shouldn't be retelling their story. And Tommy Orange is much celebrated. He's certainly a name that you know.
Yeah.
And of course, we all want to raise up Native American voices.
Of course
we all want to do that. Several great books have been written, but was his voice raised up too far and too fast? Certainly, I think if you read his book, if you read his book without knowing anything about him, you'd think, well, this is a very talented high schooler, but this isn't ready to be printed.
I'm the master of the half-good book. That's what he'll have to proclaim.
And then there's the Trump indictments.
Yeah.
That are historically important and may pave the way for a future that looks radically different from anything in 230 years of American history. since if by natural extension, if you look at a national superstructure that's bending over backwards to accommodate, well, what's the ultimate accommodation? Installing you as a dictator is the ultimate accommodation, as you know, to your dismay.
Yes, indeed.
You thought you had a guest star all those months ago.
We need to rebrand, Steve.
Remember those early days, those early innocent days of Book of the Week, when I said to you, I'm just going to be a dictator on day one. That's all.
Here we are on day 70, and he has not shed his totalitarian approach. I want to jump in the through the Guardian of Time from Star Trek, City on the Edge of Forever, and see what this show looks like on year 2 of Trump's second term. Because I think this show will be radically different too. I think we'll both be wearing strange hats, maybe have some bizarre insignia on our shoulders.
You will have a different star.
Oh God! Oh no! Oh, I forgot about that. I should have used a different.
Yes, I will be in a camp somewhere in Siberia, and you will have a different star.
Oh.
Maybe Lara Trump. She can talk about all the books she's read lately.
Sure. Wonderful. That's yikes.
Yikes.
The newest in-depth book from is so brilliant. Oh my gosh. So listen, this has been a show called Books of the Week. We come here and figure out life, and it's all brought to you and made possible by the amazing friends of the Cedarburg Library who yes, Steve, an addendum.
True fact here.
Oh,
one of the friends of the Cedarburg Public Library has a whopping 92 felony indictments, all for overdue library fees. That's pretty bad.
I would follow that one to the end of the earth and back.
They will not let you go.
My kind of people. I love it. Well, how wonderful. Steve Donahue in Boston, thank you so much. Have a wonderful reading week, and we intend to mine and plumb your findings next week. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you again.